The wind sighed between the jagged cliffs, joined by the gentle rustling of the grass. Nightfall had settled upon the mountains, silvery light painting everything in pale grays and blues. A slight shift came from a clanmate, and Riverpaw resisted the urge to flinch. Patience. Ava would arrive. She had to. Riverpaw looked at the sky. The moon had risen past the mountain ridge, drifting further overhead at an agonizing pace. If only Echopaw and Stonepaw were here. Ashheart had allowed them to be assigned to the other squad, hopefully keeping them away from the thick of the fighting. Riverpaw couldn't bear to let the plan proceed without being there, though. If Ava were killed now, Riverpaw was still trying desperately to figure out why that bothered her so much. Where is she? It was then she heard the yowl splitting into her thoughts. Ringing with pain, the sound echoed over the mountains, and Riverpaw could feel Ashheart tense beside her. More noises began to split the calm night air, growing ever louder and making the waiting cats shift uneasily. "Here we go," Wolfclaw murmured from his place a few tail lengths away. Riverpaw stared at the path below. She and the other cats were crouched among the crags of the rocky cliff face, each watching intently for any sign of the wolfish cat and her pursuer. If the plan had not already failed, those terrible shrieks and desperate rustlings were Ava luring the false alpha to this very location. A few more moments, and there, Ava stumbled into view, scrambling down the path. A few fox lengths behind, leisurely padded forward with gleaming teeth bared, was the alpha himself. One look and Riverpaw immediately recognized Hisoka, the wolf, for what he was, a cruel and ruthless killer. She had seen them enough, had felt the chill of looking into their empty eyes enough. He stepped forward with a terrible eagerness, mouth hanging open and jaws dripping with blood. His sickly yellow eyes glinted in the night, like two hungry fires waiting to leap forward and consume their prey. Ava was in a terrible state, practically dragging herself forward only fox lengths from those eager jaws. Deep cuts from the wolf's claws marked her pelt, and her back leg was dripping with several gruesome bites. Still, the she-cat continued forward, leading the alpha ever closer to the ledge. Riverpaw's claws scraped the stone, muscles longing to spring forward and help Ava as she continued to limp away from the wolf. But the apprentice knew better. Hisoka wasn't in position quite yet. The alpha almost seemed to smile as Ava briefly turned back to look at him. A sadistic, chuckling growl sounded from the wolf's throat as he darted forward and swung a paw at the injured cat. She managed to dodge his first strike, but his jaw snapped closed on her injured hind leg, and she yelped in agony as he flung her against the jagged rocks. With a taunting snarl, the alpha advanced slowly. 1 step. 2. Riverpaw leaned forward. Hisoka took a final step, closing the gap between himself and Ava, and entering the trap zone. Stoneteller let out a sharp yowl. The following moments passed in slow motion, and Riverpaw saw everything as the prepared group rushed forward to kill their enemy. Farkas jumped from his hiding spot, blocking Hisoka's path and drawing the alpha's attention. The cats pushed the loose rocks around them, starting a tumbling stream of stones. The large boulder, which Vilkas had set rolling toward the alpha, pounded the cliffside, loosening other rocks and causing a chain reaction. The cats jumped to get out of the way, some barely escaping the cascade. Riverpaw's eyes widened as Gingerpelt slipped on a small slide of pebbles. Rowan Shadow turned, eyes wide and mouth opening in a desperate screech as his mate stared in sheer terror. In the same moment as the speeding rocks threatened to bury the she-cat, a flash of dark ginger fur darted forward and pushed her away. Wolfclaw had sprung to the RiverClan she-cat's aid, a passing boulder catching his tail and causing a shriek of pain to escape his lips. The rocks continued down the slope as he scrambled to safety, following Gingerpelt. In the same moment, Vilkas was stumbling down the mountain with the rock slide, running toward his place to block Hisoka. The false alpha himself took in the situation very quickly. He bared his teeth and charged toward Ava, maybe to kill her out of rage, maybe because he knew he needed a hostage to escape. A second later, and the answer was revealed. He grasped the dark she-cat viciously in his jaws and held her while she yowled in pain, swinging and struggling as her captor dodged the tumbling rocks. Farkas gave a bark of rage and terror, but Hisoka's threatening growls kept the young wolf from dashing forward recklessly. The rocks had crumbled to a halt along the path, effectively blocking the exit and granting the gathered forces their opportunity to surround the false alpha. The first part of the plan was complete, but now came the hard part. Harder still, as now Hisoka stood with Ava clenched between his jaws, her blood dripping to the floor. Riverpaw stood with the other cats, forming a partial circle around their foe. A foul stench was in the air, sickly and somewhat familiar. It could be the stench of fear emanating from her friends, but no, it was definitely coming from the Alpha's direction. The stink of a killer, tasting like iron and bile on Riverpaw's tongue, but also holding a sweet familiarity that briefly confused the she-cat. The dust had settled, and cats and wolves stood in a stalemate. Hisoka's eyes glinted as he took in the creatures surrounding him. Ava struggled feebly in his jaws, and the tips of his mouth twisted into a jagged smile as he turned toward Vilcus. Casually, the wolf spoke in a language none of the cats could understand, but Riverpaw was sure she could guess what the Alpha's intentions were. He was goading them, taunting Ava's brothers with her life. Riverpaw's heart pounded against her ribcage with the force of a waterfall as she stood beside her clanmates. All they could do was slow the Alpha down if he attacked, but it was better than leaving the wolves to deal with him alone. Hisoka gave another chuckle and bit down slightly, eliciting a painful gasp from Ava. Farkas's eyes were blazing with rage. He took a step forward, and Vilcus barked in warning, making his brother pause. That moment of indecision was Hisoka's cue. To the horror of all those watching, the Alpha flung Ava off the cliff. Riverpaw watched the she-cat's limp, broken body fly through the air, falling down toward the jagged rocks far below. In that moment, all minds seemed to empty, and each cat and wolf could only use instinct to react. Riverpaw and Ashheart dashed forward together, slipping between the legs of the wolves and racing toward Ava. Riverpaw didn't know how she hoped to save the cat, but her frantic mind saw the ledge on the other side of the ravine. If she launched herself with enough force at the right moment... Wait! Ashheart couldn't complete his warning as the ThunderClan apprentice pushed off. Riverpaw's back paws left the stone. Her forepaws reached desperately for the bloody brown fur. For a moment, she felt weightless in the air, suspended above the rocks and cliffs. Then, she was falling. She crashed into Ava on her way down, carrying the she-cat toward the safety of the ledge. But the angle was off. They were too far away, and now they were falling faster. Riverpaw's eyes widened in terror, all the warmth in her body escaping into the rushing wind around them. The sweetly familiar, yet rancid iron stench all but consumed her in her panic. Riverpaw's heart thumping with fury and terror. A force blasted her from the side. She gasped, digging her claws into Ava, and careened into the cliff, along with the dark cat. After a moment, her frenzied mind began to settle, and she realized, I'm alive. There was rocky floor beneath her paws. Ava moaned in pain a tail length away, and a gray heap was pushing itself to its feet next to her. Ashheart? Riverpaw looked up at her mentor in a daze, now realizing that the Tom had flung himself after her and pushed all three to safety, his amber eyes bright with fear, adrenaline clearly coursing through him. But he gathered himself with a shaking breath. When are you going to start listening to me? All of Riverpaw's fear spilled out in a gasping laugh, and Ashheart joined her. The laugh ended in grunts of pain from both of them, and Riverpaw slowly pushed herself to her feet. What happened with everyone else? I don't... Ashheart began, but a piercing howl interrupted him, splitting the night air with terrifying emotion. Riverpaw looked around at the opposite cliff, the path now a little ways above them, half blocked by crags and jutting rocks. As she watched, two large figures tumbled over the edge, plummeting past and vanishing into the darkness at the bottom of the ravine. All sound from their comrades had stopped abruptly, leaving only the stillness of the mountains and the last echoes of that howl. In that void of silence, Riverpaw heard a sickening thud that she would never forget, shortly followed by a scream so terribly filled with despair it would echo through the mountains for years to come. Farkas!